Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first in this year's series of Winter Warmer Talks from the Royal Parks, which are aimed at bringing you something a little bit different during the coming winter months and to highlight and showcase various features of our wonderful Royal Parks. My name's Richard Perring. I'm the Learning Manager at the Royal Parks, and we're the charity that looks after the 8 Royal Parks in London. So these are Hyde Park, Kensington Gardens, the Green Park, St James's Park, Regent's Park and Primrose Hill, Bushy Park, Greenwich Park and Richmond Park. And through our work, we aim to engage as many people as possible with the rich heritage that the parks have to offer. And of course, we work to keep them free and accessible so that everyone can enjoy the well-being benefits that come with them if they want to as well, and to protect and improve the parks for the wonderful biodiversity and wildlife that we have in these incredible spaces. Just a reminder that this talk is being recorded so that it can be uploaded and accessed on our YouTube channel for you to enjoy again, or for your friends and family to enjoy it at a later date. So your names may appear on this recording, and your faces, if you do go on camera at some point, may appear as well, but no other details will. Please do feel free to use the chat to say hello, let us know where you're listening from. I'd love to hear from you, and you can also ask any questions in the chat that you may have for our speaker, or there's a Q&A box at the top. Either is fine. You're also welcome to react and use the buttons, the reaction buttons at the top as well, if you'd like to. So I'll just give myself a round of applause here, and you might be able to see that. So you can use those if you want to. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce tonight's guest speaker. So Scott Smith has been with the Royal Parks as a social media manager for a little while now. And if you've been enjoying the beautiful photos and behind the scenes snippets on our social media channels recently, that's probably down to him. He's also a keen history buff with a particular interest in the World Wars. So as we pause for another Remembrance Day this weekend, he's kindly agreed to share his passion through this talk, and with a particular focus on the role of the Royal Parks that the Royal Parks played during these conflicts. So I do hope you enjoy it, and Scott, it's over to you.
Thanks very much, Richard, and good evening, and welcome everyone to this. I hope you're going to have a really good time over the course of the next hour. And first of all, I want to share my screen because I've got a little presentation for us all to go through. So if I just do this, and Richard, can you see that on full screen?
Not just yet, but let's give it a second.
Share again if you like. Always some
technical. Perhaps try again. Other people can see it, so it might just be me.
Oh, okay. Everyone can see it. That's great. Yeah.
You go ahead.
Right. Okay. So the talk is titled "The Royal Parks Remembers the World Wars," and I'm sure we'll recognise this location later on when we come back to it. But I'm sure some of you have visited before. But first of all, I want to just move the slide on. So, welcome, and my story, really. So, as Richard has already said, we're going to be talking about the World Wars tonight and the Royal Parks' role in that. I hope you enjoy the next hour. Obviously, it is a huge topic, and we won't be able to cover everything. But hopefully what we do mention is of interest. And if you have any questions, please do ask them at the end of this presentation. As Richard has mentioned, my name is Scott, and I'm the social media manager for the Royal Parks. And I have more than a passing interest in military history. And it's really nice to actually see some former colleagues of mine on the chat already. So thanks very much for coming along and supporting. But I put this first slide up really just to give you a little bit of background about myself. So on the left-hand side here, you can see an image of me visiting Arnhem Oosterbeek War Cemetery in 2001, aged just 13. I mean, I'm not sure how many teenagers went on holiday to war grave cemeteries, but I was one of them. And it was really in my early years that the interest in the military history started to pick up, thanks to my grandparents telling me a lot about the world wars. And this has ultimately led for me to have a real interest in this. And in the middle there, that's me leading a tour to Normandy in the summer of 2022, and which was a real fantastic time to go back over after the pandemic and see these sites in Normandy once again, and be able to lead a tour was really a privilege of mine. And also I've been fortunate to meet a number of Second World War veterans along the way, and this was a good friend of mine, Ron Matteson. He fought in France and Germany right away up until the end of the war. Sadly, he's no longer with us, having passed away in 2020. But Ron was someone who I spoke to on numerous occasions. He was it's from the Midlands, as like I am, as you can tell, and we spoke. He really gave me a lot of insight into the World Wars, and he, believe it or not, despite serving in the Second World War, he used to do First World War reenactments as well, which was quite something. But to be able to meet these veterans it really adds another element to my knowledge. And it's sad to say that they're passing away pretty regularly now. So if you do know a veteran or get a chance to speak to a veteran, please make sure you do so, because unfortunately they won't be here forever. So I thought I just wanted to give you that little sort of insight into me, first of all. And this ultimately led to me getting a job at the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, where I worked for 6 years before joining the wonderful organisation of the Royal Parks. And talking of the Royal Parks, I'm going to kick off with memorials of different shapes and sizes. So when you visit a Royal Park, you will see many memorials, as is mentioned there, of different shapes and sizes. Some are really obvious as to what they relate to, while others aren't so much. And it might come as a surprise that there are several, it won't come as a surprise even, that there are several related to the World Wars. And these are more than 50 different memorials of different types around the parks, not all World War related. So it's really, they're really interspersed amongst the whole across the parks. And I want to start with one which I would perhaps say, I shouldn't say, is one of my favourites, and that is the memorial on the left-hand side here. It is the Bomber Command Memorial, and this commemorates 55,573 men who died while serving in the Bomber Command during the Second World War. And it's situated in Green Park, opposite the RAF Club, for those that might know that. And it really is an emotional and thought-provoking memorial, if I'm honest. It represents a bomber crew that have just returned from a sortie, and these life-size figures are really detailed, and I would recommend you going to have a look at this. It was, as you can see there, it was unveiled by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II 10 years ago now, on the 28th of June 2012, and there were some veterans who were able to come to the Green Park that day, and from memory the Lancaster bomber flew over and dropped poppies as the memorial was unveiled. It's really a wonderful memorial, and one I would recommend going to search out. And it was a place actually of commemoration only recently, with flowers being left for Her Majesty following her sad passing. Now, another memorial in Green Park is the Canada Memorial, and that's this one at the top here, the one with the pigeons on. This was again unveiled by Queen Elizabeth II, but all the way back in 1994 now, and it actually remembers the 1 million Canadians who served with British forces during the two World Wars. Now, the narrow walkway dividing the memorial in two faces the direction of the Canadian port of Halifax in Nova Scotia. This is for the reason this is where many Canadian service personnel sail for Europe on their way to heading into conflict during both World Wars. It's sometimes a memorial that gets hidden away during ceremonial events, because that grassed area around there, this is where the TV crews and the press areas outside Buckingham Palace. But again, it's one of those that you should go and seek out and find out a bit more information from the information panels around by. And actually, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission have a connection to it in that they are responsible on an agency basis for its maintenance. Now, moving to Hyde Park, and something you may have walked past many times but not known what it is. And I must admit, when I first started at the Royal Parks back in March, I saw this big granite lump and I thought, what is that? And it turns out it's the Norwegian War Memorial. And it's this one in the bottom here. It is it's located just north of the Serpentine as you head towards the old police house. And actually, the Norwegian Navy and Merchant Navy presented this large boulder in 1978 as a thanks for British support during the Second World War. The memorial consists of a boulder, as you can see, made from granite, and it's mounted on 3 smaller stones. And on the larger boulder, there's actually engraving, and it says, "You gave us a safe haven in our common struggle for freedom and peace." Quite poignant, really. And the back reads, "Worked and shaped by forces of nature for thousands of years." And so, if ever you are in the Green Park or Hyde Park, go and have a look at these memorials, and now you know a little bit more about them, because they are well worth taking in. As I say, this is just a light touch on all of the memorials across the parks. We'd be here for all evening if we wanted to cover them all. There's more on the Royal Parks website, though, about each of these. But talking of memorials that you may have missed, there is actually a much smaller one on the opposite side of the Serpentine, but actually is equally important with links to the World Wars. I should imagine that thousands of people pass by this every day. Millions have passed by it over the years. This is a memorial plaque on the Serpentine Lido Pavilion, and it's to Captain Jack Oliver Cooper, and that's the gentleman in the middle there. And you may be wondering why the Serpentine Lido Pavilion has got a plaque on it. Well, we'll come to that shortly. But Jack hailed from Harrow-on-the-Hill, and during the First World War, he served in the Royal Flying Corps, which was meaning he was one of the early pioneers of flight. And the Royal Flying Corps ultimately led to the formation with other services alongside to the Royal Air Force. And they recently, what was it? I think it was 3 years ago, they celebrated their centenary. And it was, flying at that time was a very dangerous job. When you consider that mechanized flying was still very much in its infancy. And now, sadly, at the age of 20, Jack would be killed in action on a bombing raid in France on the 21st of July, 1916. And now his brother, Major Colin Cooper, actually half-funded the Serpentine Lido Pavilion. And as such, this is why this memorial exists. And if you go to the Lido Pavilion today, as you go in through the entrance doors, before you go in, take a look on the right-hand side and you will see this memorial. As mentioned, Jack's pictured in the centre here, but sadly, he has no known grave. And as such, he's commemorated by name upon the Arras Flying Service Memorial in France. And that's this image on the end here. And you will see the globe at the top, and all the, you won't believe it, but the panels that you can see, they go all the way around the memorial, and those are names of Royal Flying Corps service personnel who died during the First World War and have no known grave. He could be buried somewhere. He could be buried under an unknown grave, but when it came to be found, there was no connection to him. So as such, his name is listed there. But also his name is listed on the Serpentine Lido Pavilion. So do go and find this one out when you're next in Hyde Park. Now, of course, there are war memorials in the parks that are non-World War. And you might be thinking, well, Scott, why are you bringing those up tonight? Because this talk's all about the World Wars. Well, it would be amiss not to mention a couple of them here. So both of these are in Brompton Cemetery. But you will notice several around the parks. If you go to Hyde Park Corner, you'll probably notice some memorials there that aren't World War related. And there's usually little inscriptions upon them that give you a bit more information. So starting with the ones that you see here in Brompton now. On the left-hand side, it's one that you may have seen, you may not have seen. And this is the Guards Memorial. And this was actually placed here to remember all those members of the Guards regiments that were lost their lives in peacetime from 1854 until 1889. So it's been there nearly 150 years. The commemorations. You may also notice some surrounding marble headstones. These are for those who lost their lives from 1889 onwards, with their names actually listed upon the headstones there. You can see, and Princess Anne, Her Royal Highness, actually visited Brompton Cemetery and took in this part of the cemetery earlier in the year, because there was some work being undertaken on these headstones in order to preserve the names that are there. The one on the opposite side, though, again, you may recognise it, and the two gentlemen that are standing there that may give it away. But in the 19th century, Chelsea Hospital's burial ground became so full that they had to start using Brompton instead. And so there are actually 2,625 men from the Chelsea Hospital buried in Brompton Cemetery amongst the, I think it's 215,000 burials that are there. Certainly worth a visit to Brompton if you ever get a chance. It's a unique place. But it wasn't until a member of the public named, wasn't until a member of the public named Marion Lee actually wrote a letter in the 1890s to highlight that all these men from Chelsea Hospital were buried there, that the graves of these veterans were largely unkept and unknown. So a campaign was started, and eventually it led to the construction of this memorial, which was unveiled in 1901. And the monument stands, as it reads, in tribute to the valour, endurance, sufferings, and devotion of these veterans who fought in almost every corner of the world. And you'll see a couple of the current Chelsea pensioners standing there in front of it. This is a picture I actually took earlier this year. And they're there in their recognisable red coats, which they wear in all weathers. And although they are no longer buried here, because there's a plot actually reserved for them in Brookwood Military Cemetery in Surrey, they still have strong links to Brompton, in that they helped to plant a wildflower meadow earlier this year. And it's something they've done for a couple of years now, and there's been some previous work around the centenary of the First World War. So it's really good that the Royal Parks have got that link with the Chelsea pensioners, and this memorial stands there in all its glory to also honour them. But moving back to the World Wars, and you got a little sneak preview of this by mistake, just, but so, as mentioned earlier, I worked for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission for 6 years. And some of you may have heard of it, some of you may not have heard of the organisation. But the Commonwealth War Graves Commission originally was titled the Imperial War Graves Commission, and it was formed during the First World War in May 1917. And it was by a gentleman by the name of Sir Fabian Ware, who was working in the British Red Cross at the time, and due to the number of casualties from the First World War, it was decided by him that he had to do something about all these men whose burials may just become overgrown, and so he eventually got Royal Charter in May 1917, and the War Graves Commission came to be. They now commemorate more than 1.7 million service personnel across 23,000 locations and in 150 countries and territories all around the globe. And Brompton Cemetery is one of those 23,000 locations. And I know that we've got some former commission staff, no, current commission staff, I should say, on the call today, and some who are responsible for going and inspecting graves in Brompton as well. So great to have you with us. But for everyone else who may not be aware, there are actually 380 Commonwealth World War burials in Brompton. Several which you will be able to see by the recognisable white headstone, as you can see on the screen here. It's perhaps something you see in your local churchyards. If you've ever visited war graves around the world, the white headstone, usually made of Portland, but there are numerous different materials used depending on where the headstone is located. But it's something that immediately jumps out whenever you go into a cemetery, and if you're interested in this aspect of work, then it definitely jumps out to you, and you can be certainly make a beeline for war graves wherever you are. But what we've got here is a plot of war graves. These are all they're not all buried together. They're likely to have individual graves, but they are buried. They are in a plot, which makes it a lot easier to find. But not all war graves are in the same plot, like on the right. Some are hidden away throughout Brompton Cemetery. Some are in the undergrowth. Some are behind other headstones. And you can see an example of one such here. Now the ground was actually cleared around this one. You can see just because it was actually being replaced earlier this year. Now, when a headstone becomes illegible, if there's a mistake on a headstone, if it's a new headstone that needs to go in because it's a new casualty, then the War Graves Commission to this day will come and replace those headstones. And this is exactly what happened here with Private Woodruff. He required a new headstone. The team from War Graves Commission came along, installed the headstone, and it will be now there in perpetuity. So, in Brompton now, as I already mentioned, there are hundreds of thousands of commemorations, and there's some real unique ones. And one of the more unusual war graves in Brompton is that of Flight Sub-Lieutenant Reginald Warnford, VC. Now, the VC mentioned there is a nod towards the Victoria Cross, which he was awarded during the First World War. And you can see Reginald in the middle here, quite a dapper chap as he was. And his grave is on this one here. And actually it can be found on the left of the central avenue as you approach the chapel from the north side of the cemetery. So if you're walking down that central avenue, and you've got the chapel about 300 or 400 yards in front of you, his grave is on the left-hand side. Now, whilst I was undertaking research for this talk, I'd obviously already, this is my photo, so I'd already found out information about him, but there's actually a video of his interment, and it's quite fascinating to look at his burial 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago now, and for it to be on film. So go and have a look at that if you can. But we mentioned the Victoria Cross, and an extract from the London Gazette, dated 11th of June 1915, records the reason for his awarding of that. And it reads as follows: for most conspicuous bravery on the 7th of June 1915, when he attacked and single-handedly completely destroyed a Zeppelin in mid-air. This brilliant achievement was accomplished after chasing the Zeppelin from the coast of Flanders to Ghent. where he succeeded in dropping his bombs onto it from a height of only 100 or 200 feet. One of these bombs caused a terrific explosion which set the Zeppelin on fire from end to end, but at the same time overturned his aeroplane and stopped the engine. In spite of this, he succeeded in landing safely in hostile country, and after 15 minutes started his engine and returned to the base without damage. I mean, that last line is quite something. Not only had he shut down the Zeppelin, but then he landed behind enemy lines, and then he had to start the engine on his plane again to get him away to safety. And it's reported that German forces were a matter of yards away from capturing before he said a few words on his exit, and back up into the air he went. But sadly, Warneford would never see the Victoria Cross himself, because on the 17th of June 1915, he was killed whilst ferrying an aircraft between two airfields. A journalist was also on board at the time, and they died when the aircraft's frame actually broke up in midair. And although Warneford survived landing on the ground, no parachute, remember, in those times, he died on his way to hospital. Now, what's interesting about this is that he actually died in France, but he's buried in Brompton. So his body was repatriated to the UK, which very rarely happened. Hence why there's so many burials on the continent and around the world. But what's quite interesting about his grave is you will see the Zeppelin and also his aircraft flying off after dropping the bombs onto it. I think it's a real unusual one in Brompton. Something else that I should imagine people just walk past because they don't associate it with being one of those Portland headstones, as I mentioned earlier. But that's the grave of Lieutenant Colonel Thayer, and it's a war grave of a different kind, that being a Gallipoli marker. Now, you might be wondering, why is it called a Gallipoli marker? Well, obviously, these were first installed in Gallipoli, Turkey, because of the ground conditions there. They couldn't have a headstone that stood up, so these lower down markers were installed. But originally, Lieutenant Thayer was buried under a private family memorial, which you can actually see here. His name was recorded on the end of it. You can just make it out here, in loving memory. But as it became illegible, the new headstone marker was installed. So although the family chose at the time not to have a war grave, because his name was no longer could be commemorated, the War Graves Commission came along and installed a Gallipoli marker. So this is just a matter of feet down from Warneford. So go and have a look next time you are in Brompton. So we couldn't do a talk of this nature without looking at the staff of the Royal Parks and those who went off to war. Now, I will say it looks mainly, well, it does look predominantly at the First World War staff. I know there's work currently going on to look at those Second World War staff, and it's something I would be fascinated to see. So we'll have a look at these members of staff who served in the line of duty. So 24 Royal Park staff would go off to work during the First World War, go off to the fight, sorry, during the First World War, and never return. And a plaque honouring them can actually be found in Brompton. You can just see this on the side, this side of the screen, and this is thanks to the work of the Royal Parks Guild. This was unveiled on the 7th of November 2018 to mark the 100th anniversary of the ending of the First World War. And you can see the names listed upon it, but it's also dedicated to staff and all UK parks, gardens and ground staff who died during the First World War. And I know there's a little ceremony taking place on Friday, and it seems quite a nice place to do such things as this because we've got that connection to the World Wars. Of those listed on the plaque is Arthur William Berry, who worked for the Royal Parks as a gardener. And sadly, he was one of those who lost their lives during the First World War. That's Arthur in the middle with his uniform and looking ready to take on anything that's thrown at him. He was employed by the Royal Parks at Hampton Court Palace, because when the war broke out in 1914, that was actually a Royal Park back then. And Arthur served in the Royal Garrison Artillery, and he was sent to Singapore and Ireland and finally France. Now, I guess looking at the hat, that's when he was off to Singapore, because I don't think he'd be requiring that in Ireland or France. One morning, though, sadly, an enemy plane dropped a bomb on their field battery, and he was killed alongside everyone who was around him in his gun. He died on the 25th of September 1918, and he's buried in Bertincourt Chateau British Cemetery in France. And I wanted to put the final piece in on this page, because I know some of you will know and have seen these, but others might never have seen these and wonder what it is. It's actually Arthur's death penny, and all families of casualties from the First World War were sent one of these. You may even have one in your family, and you may have seen one and not known what it is. But you can see his name here, and some of these are actually on the private memorial graves. You will see there's still one or two around. Families actually had them incorporated into the grave themselves itself. So you may see these pop up at car boots, on online auction sites. You know, they're still pretty regular around, but some people don't actually know what they are. So that's the death penny for Arthur Berry. And I need to, at this point, thank some of my former colleagues, because I pulled in a few favours here to get images of headstones from around the world of Royal Parks staff. So the man you see pictured here is Hoary Tribe. I mean, what a great name. He was born in 1877 near Petersfield in Hampshire. And in 1911, Hoary had moved jobs and was working for the Office of Works in Greenwich Park as a propagator. Now, upon the outbreak of the First World War, Hoary joined the army and was posted to the Royal Irish Rifles London Regiment, spending time in France and Greece before embarking for Egypt and finally Palestine. He would sadly be killed in action on the 8th of December 1917, aged 40, and he's actually buried in Jerusalem War Cemetery, and this is his grave from Jerusalem War Cemetery. So thank you to Nadia, who maintains this grave, and you can see some of the horticulture that's alongside it. As mentioned already, exactly the same as those in Brompton, wherever you are in the world. Now we've got two more on this page as well, you will see. So moving along, Private Ellis James Gray, he worked in the Central Parks as a labourer. And in August 1917, he was serving in the Kensington Battalion, London Regiment. But he was killed during Passchendaele, the Third Battle of Ypres, on the 16th of August 1917 in Belgium. And he's actually buried in Perth Cemetery, China Wall. You will notice, unlike Hoary, that these next two graves have something on the bottom, some writing on the bottom. This is called a personal inscription, and this was actually chosen by family members at the time. The War Graves Commission wrote to members of the family, the next of kin, and they asked for a personal inscription to be provided. Now, there was a charge at first of 3.5 unless you were, from memory, is it New Zealand, where the government paid for it. But eventually that charge was scrapped, and families were able to leave their messages. And whenever you look at a war grave, there are there's some real poignant ones from memory. Something, my only son, will someone in a foreign field always remember him? You know, there's been books written about this. You know, it's when you next see a war grave, do take a look at them. But these are ones of Royal Parks staff. And the third member on this page is another former Royal Parks member of staff, and he's also buried in Belgium, and that's Private Henry William Shepherd, who was killed in action October 1917, and he was one of 450 casualties on that day. I mean, it's when you say that number, it's almost unbelievable. 450 service personnel killed in one action in one part of Belgium. Henry was actually employed by the Office of Works as a gardener at Kensington Gardens. And I want to say thank you to Neela from Belgium, who's provided these two images for me. As already mentioned, these staff stories are First World War focused, but from speaking with members of the Royal Parks Guild, I know there is work ongoing for the Second World War. So if anyone's got any information about Royal Park staff in the Second World War, get in touch, because we'd always love to hear from you. Now into the archive. So archives can highlight different elements, and actually in Hyde Park we recently found a scrapbook with clippings from the Second World War relating to the parks, and inside was a sad story of an incident in Hyde Park which would cost the life of a Second World War serviceman, and it reads as follows. A bomb crater 10 foot deep in the Serpentine. No one knew it was there. Drowned a soldier bathing in water, though thought to be only 4.5 feet deep. This was revealed at the inquest at Westminster yesterday. Thousands of people, unaware of their peril, have bathed near this spot. The soldier was Lance Corporal Frederick Claude Hardgrave, 24, of the Royal Army Pay Corps, whose home was in Edgehill Road, Scarborough, Yorks. 6 feet tall, he was said to be a weak swimmer. Norman Kendall, a home guard who volunteered to dive, found the body in the crater. It was so narrow at the bottom that I could not turn round and had to put my foot down and kick off to get out, Kendall told the coroner. Immediately the crater was discovered, red danger flags were planted to warn other bathers. From the beginning of last winter, between 20,000 and 30,000 people had swum in the area, said an attendant. Accidental death was the verdict. So a sad story involving the Serpentine in Hyde Park. That's, again, you can see his war grave up in Scarborough, which is his body was actually returned home to there, and he's in a little plot up there. But the archives are fascinating places, and if you ever get a chance to go in, it doesn't have to relate to the World Wars. Archives in general have got so much information, and that's why it's really, really important that archives are continued. So this, though, will eventually go into our archive, and it was a real find. And I know Anna from our interpretation and wayfinding team really was enjoying the content from within this, because it's helping the team tell the story of the parks even further. So I know we had some questions about this, and I've titled this part Different Part Uses, and it's highlighting the First World War. So upon the outbreak of the First World War, the military services were required areas to train men, build infrastructure, and generally just support the war effort. And obviously the big open spaces of the Royal Parks were perfect for this. So training in Richmond Park during the First World War, you can just see them on their bicycles here. I mean, it's a wonderful shot. I wonder if we could actually recreate this in 2022. But Richmond Park itself, and I must say, it is a light touch again, because you could spend hours talking about every single park in detail, but we haven't sadly got the time to do so. But there are some wonderful resources online, none more so than the Guild's Centenary First World War book, which you can get through the Royal Parks website just by searching First World War. But Richmond Park itself was used as a depot. Hospitals were installed, and various warfare experiments were undertaken, including balloon usage and parachuting. I mean, when you think during the First World War that these technologies were being developed, I mean, there were very brave men and women who undertook the training. And the second image on the page, I think it's just wonderful. It's actually the cavalry training on Rotten Row in Hyde Park. I mean, again, it's a scene that could quite easily be replicated 100 years later. It's really interesting to note that the barriers And Rotten Row itself probably hasn't changed too much since this picture was taken. I must say at this moment, you might see the little watermark IWM, so that's the Imperial War Museum. Talking of archives, they've got a really good online archive, and you could search for hours and hours and hours at your heart's content for images focusing around the Royal Parks, and there are hundreds on there. So we've touched on Richmond, we've touched on Hyde Park. I know there was the Postal Service as well at Regent's Park, but one of perhaps the most important, I would say, during the First World War, if we're going to be a little bit biased, was something in Kensington Gardens, and it played a huge part in a new tool, and that being camouflage. So you have to bear with me here. You can see the huts in the background, but it makes them a little bit more tricky with the camouflage that is upon them. And you can see some of the buildings here that have been camouflaged. So the Kensington Gardens Camouflage School was well hidden, mind the pun, at Buck Hill, close to where the Italian Gardens are. And this was so that a new science of camouflage could be tested, because like all these things, we've got to test them out. So trenches, pits and dugouts were all constructed. And you can just see some of them on this other image here. You can see the zigzag of the trenches. Those that don't know, trenches are not always in straight lines, because obviously if a blast was to go off in a trench, then everyone who is along that trench would be killed or injured. Whereas if they're zigzagged, they found that the blast was managed within a certain section of the trench. You can see mounds, you can see pits, you can see areas that have been dug out. I think it's a really interesting overhead image. You can see where the nursery, the Hyde Park nursery, stands now. This is obviously the forerunner of it here. And this picture was taken during the First World War. You can see the Italian Gardens. But this was the area which was given over to the camouflage school. Now, some of you might say, well, we shouldn't be able to see it, but obviously, with all this work that was happening, it would not go unnoticed. And that is very true, because it was finally returned to the public in June 1919 after much pressure, because originally they wanted to keep the area as it was and use it going forward, but eventually it was returned to the public. 20 years later, upon the second outbreak of the Second World War, the army were back, and both these guns may look the same. That's because they're 3.7mm anti-aircraft guns. This first image here was actually in Richmond Park, and it's interesting to note they've actually constructed a proper concrete base and surrounds. Whilst the second one was taken in 1939 on Hyde Park on the parade ground. If you went there today, you'd see the setup for Winter Wonderland. But at this moment in time, in 1939, you would have seen anti-aircraft guns like this. The open spaces of the parks help provide great defensive locations from German bombers. And, you know, the parks really did play their part during the Second World War. Of course, it wasn't all about defence. Land was set aside in Hyde Park, Greenwich Park, Kensington Gardens in order to grow vegetables as part of Britain's Dig for Victory campaign. And you can see this is a classic shot from Kensington Gardens with the Albert Memorial in the background and the veg being grown. Hyde and Greenwich Parks also provided sanctuary, the latter offering free shelters that could house up to 500 people. And this one in Hyde Park was set up specifically to take your pets in with you. And you can see two dogs just coming out with their owners there. And the parks also served more sophisticated purposes, as seen here in Hyde Park, with a lovely afternoon tea taking place. Now, one of the biggest, perhaps unknown stories in some ways is at Bushy Park. So to see the deer grazing there today, it's hard to imagine that the area was home to almost 8,000 US troops during the Second World War. In 1942, Camp Griffiths was established in the northeast corner of the park, and it was named after Lieutenant Colonel Townsend Griffiths, the first American officer to die in Europe during the conflict. You see the camp up here. It was in 1944, though, that Bushy played a crucial part in starting to bring the war to an end. In February, General Eisenhower, Dwight D. Eisenhower, I should give you his full name, sitting here in the middle, moved the supreme headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Forces, so SHAEF, to the park, taking over some of the Camp Griffiths. This is where the initial planning of Operation Overlord, the invasion of France, took place. The top secret mission to invade European mainland that was launched on the 6th of June 1944, more betterly known as D-Day. And Bushy Park plays such a huge role in this. And you go there today and you perhaps might not notice, apart from some interpretation and some plaques, and of course the SHAEF Gate, which we'll come to shortly. So you can see the memorial plaque, which was laid by the RAF in honour of their American comrades. I think it's quite nice. Bearing an inscription from the French Colossus Victor Hugo: "It is through fraternity that liberty is saved." And for the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the park entrance used by Eisenhower was reopened and is now called the SHAEF Gate. And you can go there today and see that and enter through there. And it was the area beyond there which was actually used as well. So this is along the Chestnut Avenue, I believe. And yeah, it's a real fascinating part of history. And with the 80th anniversary coming up in a couple of years' time, it would probably be amiss not to mark that in some way. The Royal Parks were, of course, not immune from being damaged by enemy action during the World Wars. And during the Blitz from September 40 even, all the way through, predominantly through 1941 as well. It continued with the V rockets at the end of the war as well. But the Blitz rained down terror on London. And we've already heard about the bomb crater in the Serpentine. And the landscape of several parks were changed with enemy bombs creating huge craters. Statues and memorials didn't escape damage either, though. Heading out to Greenwich Park, you will see the statue that was built in 1930 to commemorate General James Wolfe. And the statue remembers Wolfe's victory against the French at Quebec, which secured Canada for the British. But just a decade later, after being built, it was left damaged forever by the Second World War actions, as you can see here. See it pock-marked all across the back of it. And there is a story that a German plane targeted the memorial on purpose. I mean, it's a little bit hard to believe, because actually in reality these are shrapnel marks from bombing runs on the anti-aircraft guns like we saw earlier that were stationed in the park. You can see that the shrapnel has really taken some big dents out of the memorial. And I think it's quite nice in a way that it was kept like this, because it's part of its history and it really tells it. So next time you go and stand and look at this wonderful view over the city, make sure to take a look at the memorial as well, which has some Second World War history. Another memorial right in the heart of London, which was damaged, stands on the edge of St James's Park. Now, facing Wellington Barracks, it's the Guards Memorial, which was installed in memory of guardsmen who died in the First World War. So there's a crossover here. It was unveiled in 1926 by the Duke of Connaught, the uncle of King George V. Now, the memorial was actually damaged by German bombs during the Second World War. And during the repairs, a small hole was deliberately left in one of the sculptures. And you can see some of the pot marks again on the side of the memorial here. Always go and take a closer look at this memorial when you're next in town, because these are lasting pieces of damage and lasting pieces of history. Now, we couldn't do a talk of this nature and not mention Remembrance Sunday and the role that Horse Guards Parade plays. So this coming weekend, the eyes of the nation and the world will be on the parade ground as the salute is taken by a member of the royal family to those completing the parade. And you can see Prince William here undertaking that duty. Prior to this, though, the 11 AM gun sounds from here, and you can see that at the bottom. And so make sure to keep an eye and an ear out for that on Sunday. Now, I was actually fortunate enough to parade onto here in 2018, and I must admit it was a real honour for me to be able to do this on the 100th anniversary of the First World War, whilst wearing my great-great-grandfather and great-grandfather's war medals. I'm wearing them on the opposite side, though, to this gentleman here who I used to work with, because these are the medals that he actually earned whilst in service. And you can see other veterans in the background here. Now, St James's Park and Horse Guards Parade has been the home of many larger celebrations over the years, with National VE Day, 50th, 70th, and 75th events taking place here, and centenary events for the Royal Air Force and the British Army. And that, I think, really shows the continued link with the Royal Parks and the modern day remembrance. Now on to our final slide tonight. I put this one in because it caused a few chuckles amongst members of my team when I showed them it. But sometimes you need a tin hat like this when working on social media. This is one in the collection back home in the Midlands, though. I really hope you found this talk of interest, and I would say please do consider supporting our work by visiting the web address there, royalparks.org.uk, to find out more. You can also leave a donation if you so wish to help further support. Some housekeeping now. Tune into the forthcoming Winter Warmer talks. The next one is Creature Comforts, the Victorian Connection with Animals, and that's on Tuesday the 13th December with Anna Barry. It's going to be another cracking one, so please do make sure to tune in. And I must admit, the talk tonight couldn't have been possible without a few people. So that's the Royal Parks Guild, Bill Swan from Bushy Park, Neela Bill and Nadia Habash, both from CWGC, the Imperial War Museum for their images. So it's been a bit of a team effort, and I've really enjoyed learning further myself about this. Now, at this moment, I'm going to stop my presentation and see if there's any questions that have come in, Richard, that you might want to throw my way.
Yeah, so thank you, Scott. It was such a fascinating talk and really moving personal stories there as well. And amazing stuff. Thank you so much for that. There's a couple of questions that were sent in when people signed up because they had the option to submit questions when they registered. So I'll just put those to you first, and then I'll go over to the chat where there's a few that have been added in there as well. So the first one is, are there any links to the American servicemen in the parks or any American citizens?
Yeah, I think it's the Bushy Park is the main link there, as we've mentioned. I mean, it's amazing to think that there were 8,000 American service personnel stationed in Bushy Park during the Second World War. I should mention as well, Bushy Park had a long history in the First World War as well. But yeah, the Americans were there. Numbers of celebrities also came. American celebrities also came to Bushy Park. Anna and I were actually there recently and undertaking a look, and it's a really fascinating one. So yeah, Bushy Park's your one for links with American service personnel.
Thank you. There's another question that was submitted. So it says, during my walks in Richmond Park, I often come across brick foundations. So what are those brick foundations about? What role did the Richmond Park play during the World Wars? Again, I know you touched on this a little bit.
Yeah, I think whenever we're out and about walking, it is always nice when you stumble across something and think, oh, what's that all about? And I know back in my homeland of Cannock, and when I'm walking across Cannock Chase, you will still see buildings there from the Second World War. And in Richmond Park, it is no doubt the same, that there's still structures that will be there. And as mentioned in the talk, it had a long history in the First World War and also in the Second World War. And as I mentioned, the anti-aircraft gun emplacement was a permanent structure, which could quite possibly be what this person has found out.
Yeah, thank you. And there's a sort of not so much a question, but a comment, I suppose, on the nearby Bushy Park as well. So this is picking up on what you were talking about. I think for the 80th anniversary, it would be great if the memorial in Bushy Park could be restored. We can. I don't know if there are any plans for that at the moment, but we can look into that.
I think it's something that I know the Royal Parks Guild are looking at working upon as well, and I know that there's new interpretation due to go in there in the coming year as well. So there will be a refresh in Bushy Park.
Certainly very important to us as an organisation looking after these memorials. There was another question about whether the Royal Parks provides walking tours looking at the memorials. And as you mentioned, Scott, we had a big project. I think it was a Heritage Lottery funded project running a few years ago, linked to the centenary of the First World War, and a lot was done on it, linked to that. And we've had other sort of tours and events before the pandemic that we ran too, but I think it's probably about time we picked some of those up and did a bit more. But there are certainly lots of walking tours on offer on various different subjects throughout the year, which you can access through our website, and I'll give you the plug for that in a minute. Another question for you, Scott. It says, "Hi Scott, what is the biggest and smallest World War memorials in the Royal Parks?"
I was just looking through the comments actually on the right, and I noticed it's from someone called Jack, who I think I used to work with. So the smallest I would say is the memorial plaque on the Serpentine Lido Pavilion. It's perhaps a little war memorial that we walk past every day and you don't see. Largest, good question. Off the top of my head, I wouldn't be able to name the largest. It's got to be, I say the Bomber Command Memorial is up there, but there's also obviously the ones on Hyde Park Corner, which we have some responsibility for as well. So yeah, it's a good one to take away, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to define largest, whether it's in size or names mentioned upon it.
That's a good point. Are there any memorials to women?
Within the parks themselves, I would have to have a look at, but there are certainly memorials to women across London. There's a bust of Noor Inayat Khan, who was a special agent during the Second World War. She's got a garden area within London. Within the Royal Parks, though, I would have to have a look at that one. Good question.
And I've got another one that's probably quite specific, so I'll try you with it anyway. Are there any plans to excavate some test pits on the training trenches at all?
I mean, I might go to Park Manager Andy Williams after this and suggest so, but I don't know what his response would be. But no, all jokes aside, actually, not at Kensington, but I know during the First World War centenary, there was some work done at Greenwich where test pits were undertaken, and they found various items, including a little toy metal soldier, which one of the soldiers from that were stationed there must have left behind. And Greenwich Park is the one under Greenwich Park Revealed, where there's a lot of excavations been taking place, not just World War related, but also from Roman all the way through to more modern times. So I don't think there's going to be anything at Kensington, but you never know. Them. Keep an eye out in the future.
Yeah, it's amazing work going on at Greenwich at the moment, so I hope we'll be able to do more of that sort of thing in other places in the future. Sandra has put a question saying, "Do you only cover the London Royal Parks?" So I'm not sure if you caught the beginning, Sandra, but so our organisation is a charity, and we cover the 8 Royal Parks in London, and plus a couple of other spaces, including Brompton Cemetery, which Scott's talked about a lot. So yes, that is our focus. That's why this talk's focused on that in particular tonight. I think there's a couple of lovely comments, well, a lot of lovely comments from people, including lots of thanks to you, Scott. But I think we've tackled all the questions as far as I can see at the moment, and we're pretty much bang on time to finish as well. So I think I'll just say thank you again to Scott for doing such a fantastic presentation for us this evening. Reminder, the recording will go on to the YouTube channel, the Royal Parks YouTube channel, as soon as we can organise that. So if you'd like to share it with anyone, you'll be able to do that when it's up there. If you've enjoyed it this evening, you'd like to make a donation to support our work as a charity to look after these incredible spaces, and then I've already put a link in the chat. I'll pop it in again so that you've got that. And we'd really appreciate anything that you can give to support us. I'll also put a link to the upcoming Winter Warmer online talks. So there'll be one every month for the next few months on different subjects related to the Royal Parks. So if you'd like to join another one, we'd love to see you there. And I'll put a link to our wider programme of events as well, so tours and other workshops and things that go on in the parks that you might also be interested in. So I'll pop those into the chat now. But just remains to say thank you so much again for joining this evening, and thanks to Scott for presenting to us.